The philosopher who solved the meaning of life? Leo Tolstoy, achieving fame, wealth, and global recognition, only to be consumed by an existential crisis so deep that it forces you to question the very foundation of your life. This was the dilemma faced by Leo Tolstoy, one of the greatest literary figures in human history. After reaching the peak of artistic success with monumental works like War and Peace and Anna Karenina, Tolstoy embarked on a profound and often painful journey in search of life's true meaning. But what if I told you that Tolstoy believed he had found the answer? In this video, we will explore how Tolstoy confronted his inner doubts, what philosophical conclusions he reached, how his revelations could forever change the way you see your own existence. Before we dive in, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because this is one of those rare stories that will make you reflect deeply on your own journey. 1. Tolstoy's existential emptiness and philosophical crisis. Leo Tolstoy was born in 1828 into an aristocratic Russian family. From a young age, he enjoyed access to the finest education available and quickly stood out as a brilliant and curious mind. However, his early years were marked by a life of indulgence, excess, and pursuit of pleasure, an era he would later look back on with regret. Even in his youth, Tolstoy's inner unrest signaled that he was more than a gifted writer. He was a man tormented by questions deeper than art or success. Over time, he achieved worldwide fame with masterpieces like War and Peace and Anna Karenina. His genius was undeniable, and his fortune provided him with comfort, admiration, and prestige. Yet behind the glamorous facade of success, Tolstoy experienced a growing internal void. The praise, recognition, and wealth he had gained failed to soothe a deepening emptiness inside him. He began to confront a terrifying realization that all human achievements, no matter how grand, were ultimately temporary. The idea that everything he had built would someday fade away and be forgotten haunted him. Tolstoy once wrote that life became unbearable the moment one truly comprehended its finiteness. This is when he began to ask the deepest of questions. What is the point of all this? Nothing we do carries eternal value. Why do we strive so hard? Why do we suffer, love, work, fight, if in the end everything dissolves into death? These questions consumed him. They were no longer abstract thoughts. They overwhelmed him, pressing on him with unbearable weight. What tormented Tolstoy most was that his efforts to find meaning through logic and reason had failed him. He turned to science, philosophy, and art, searching for clarity, but each fell short. Rationality told him that life was nothing more than a temporary phenomenon, that nothing truly mattered. This cold conclusion plunged him into a severe existential crisis. Tolstoy would later describe this state as a black hole, one that sucked every ounce of joy and purpose from his life. He lost interest in writing. He no longer found meaning in taking care of his family. Even the act of staying alive felt pointless. On his private diaries, Tolstoy confessed that the only thing he felt certain of was death, and this certainty made life unbearable. The thought of suicide began to haunt him daily. He admitted to hiding ropes and weapons from himself, fearing that he might take his own life in a moment of despair. The pain of living without answers became so immense that death started to appear as a form of liberation. And yet something inside him stopped him from taking that final, irreversible step. Instead of surrendering to despair, Tolstoy made a radical decision: to go deeper. If science and reason could not provide the answers he needed, perhaps the truth lay elsewhere. But where? 2. The search for answers. Science, religion, and philosophy. After acknowledging that his life was sinking into a deep spiritual void, Tolstoy began an intense and relentless search for answers. He was no longer willing to simply accept life as it was. He needed to find a true, authentic meaning for his existence. To begin this search, he decided to explore 3 major paths: science, religion, and philosophy. At first, Tolstoy placed his hope in science. He believed that perhaps scientific understanding would reveal a deeper logic behind life and the universe. He immersed himself in scientific literature, studying theories from biology, physics, and astronomy. He wanted to understand whether there was any ultimate purpose hidden in the vast workings of the cosmos. Yet instead of providing comfort, science only intensified his anguish. Science could explain how things functioned but not why they existed. Biology told him that life had evolved through a long process of natural selection, but it offered no answer to the deeper question. What is the purpose of human existence? Astronomy revealed the incredible immensity of the universe, but with that immensity came a profound sense of human insignificance. What was the point of a single life in a cold and different cosmos? Tolstoy realized that science, for all its power to explain physical phenomena, was helpless when it came to the deeper questions of the soul. He famously wrote that scientists could explain how a tree grows, but not why it exists in the first place. So once again, he turned his eyes elsewhere. Next, he looked to philosophy. He dove into the writings of the world's greatest thinkers, both ancient and modern, from the Greek masters like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, to Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment philosophers like Immanuel Kant, Arthur Schopenhauer, and Friedrich Nietzsche. He found in their works brilliant and stimulating ideas, but not definitive answers. Some philosophers argued that life had purpose and structure. Others insisted that life had no intrinsic meaning at all. The sheer variety of conflicting views only added to his confusion. How could so many great minds have such opposing interpretations of the same question? Instead of clarity, philosophy offered a labyrinth of thought. Tolstoy realized that philosophy, while intellectually rich, was often trapped in abstract debates that failed to provide practical or emotional relief. These were interesting ideas, yes, but they didn't solve the problem of how to live. He didn't just want to think about meaning. He wanted to feel it, to live it. That desire led him down a third path: religion. Despite having been raised within the Russian Orthodox Christian tradition, Tolstoy had never fully embraced religion in a personal way. It had always been more of a social convention than a spiritual anchor. But now, in the midst of his existential despair, he decided to revisit faith not out of tradition, but out of necessity. He began with the Gospels, reading the words of Jesus Christ from a fresh perspective. He tried to remove all influence of institutional religion and dogma, seeking instead the essence of Christ's teachings. What stood out to him was the profound emphasis on love, forgiveness, humility, and detachment from material possessions. Here, he sensed something different, something that directly addressed the human soul. Perhaps the meaning of life could not be found in logic or knowledge at all. Maybe it resided in doing good, in loving others, and in living according to spiritual principles. But Tolstoy did not stop with Christianity. His intellectual curiosity and his desperation compelled him to look at the teachings of other faiths. He studied Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and Taoism, searching for a thread of truth that connected them all. And indeed, he found striking similarities. Each of these great spiritual traditions spoke of transcending the ego, quote, embracing simplicity and living in harmony with something greater than oneself. He was particularly moved by the teachings of Buddhism and Indian philosophy. The Buddhist idea that suffering is born from attachment and that peace can be found through the renunciation of desire resonated deeply with him. He began to wonder if perhaps he had spent his life searching for happiness in all the wrong places. Each new discovery shifted his worldview further. Gradually, he realized that his existential despair wasn't the result of a lack of answers, but rather the result of where he was looking for those answers. He had tried to find meaning through material success and rational logic, but perhaps the truth lay in simplicity and spirituality. Still, he wasn't fully convinced. He wrestled with doubts. Could one truly live like this in the modern world? Was faith genuine, or just a comforting illusion? He noticed that deeply religious people seemed more content, but was that contentment based on truth or on self-deception? Tolstoy longed for more than emotional relief. He wanted certainty. He wanted proof that there was a real purpose to existence. So, he decided to conduct an experiment, in theory, but in his own life. He began applying the religious and spiritual teachings he had encountered. He simplified his lifestyle. He abandoned many aristocratic privileges. He devoted more time to charity and focused on serving others. And to his surprise, the results were immediate and profound. For the first time in many years, Tolstoy felt something return to him: peace, a sense of quiet joy, a calm he had long forgotten. He realized that true happiness did not come from wealth, recognition, or intellectual achievements. It came from something far more human: connection, humility, compassion, and spiritual grounding. But not everyone welcomed his transformation. His family and friends were bewildered. Why was one of Russia's greatest writers, respected among nobles and elites, abandoning his status and siding with peasants? Many accused him of betrayal. Others called him insane. Tolstoy didn't care. He knew he was finally on the right path. His crisis had turned into a calling. Though the search for answers was far from over, he now had a direction, a way forward. No longer was he lost in abstract theory or empty success. He had discovered a new lens through which to view life. And now, the challenge was no longer philosophical, it was practical. How do you take this understanding and live it fully? How do you turn spiritual insight into a meaningful daily existence? These are the questions that would define the next phase of his journey. In the following section, we'll explore what Tolstoy found in the lives of ordinary people, how their wisdom helped him arrive at the profound answer he had been searching for. 3. The discovery of the meaning of life. According to Tolstoy had spent years searching through science, philosophy, and religion, driven by the urgent need to understand the true meaning of life. But the answer he was looking for didn't come from books, theories, or institutions. It came from a much simpler, often overlooked place: the everyday lives of ordinary people. As he observed the peasants living around him, he began to see something that had long eluded him. These men and women, who've lived in far more difficult conditions than he ever had, seemed to possess an inner peace and quiet strength that he had never known. They labored in the fields, owned very little, endured constant hardships, and yet somehow still managed to find joy, connection, and a sense of purpose in life. Their happiness wasn't rooted in external achievements, luxury, or recognition. It stemmed from faith, honest work, and relationships with others. The contrast was striking. While members of the intellectual elite were plagued by existential questions and restlessness, the peasants simply lived. They didn't try to rationalize life, they accepted it. Through this acceptance, they found meaning. This revelation changed everything for Tolstoy. He began to realize that the meaning of life was not buried in philosophical complexities or spiritual abstractions. It was right in front of him, simple, human, and profound. The answer, he concluded, was not in wealth, fame, or knowledge. It was in love, compassion, and service to others. This discovery completely overturned his worldview. He began to reject the dominant cultural belief that individual success equaled happiness. Instead, he came to see that the true purpose of life was to live for others and to connect to something greater than the self. He started crafting a personal philosophy of life based on simplicity, humility, and selfless service. Tolstoy believed that only love could give life its ultimate meaning, that without it, life would inevitably become empty and despairing. In his own words, the meaning of life was to love and to serve. This, he felt, was the only way to escape the pain of existential doubt and discover lasting peace. But for Tolstoy, this wasn't just an intellectual breakthrough. It was a call to action. He didn't want this to remain a theory. He needed to live it. So, he began to apply this vision to his own life, one step at a time. He rejected the privileges of his aristocratic status. He embraced manual labor, simplified his daily routines, and sought to live in solidarity with the peasants he now admired so deeply. He also began to develop and promote a vision of Christianity based on action, not passive belief. To him, it wasn't enough to have faith in God. One had to live the principles of love, peace, and nonviolence. This shift led him to revere figures like Jesus, Buddha, and even Gandhi, whose philosophy of nonviolent resistance would later be directly inspired by Tolstoy's writings. To Tolstoy, these spiritual figures were not just icons, they were models of what it meant to live a life of meaning. Each of them had chosen love and service over power and ego, and that's what made them great. As his spiritual transformation deepened, Tolstoy grew increasingly critical of organized religion, especially the Russian Orthodox Church. He believed that the Church had strayed far from the teachings of Jesus, becoming more focused on power, wealth, and rituals than on love, humility, or truth. His bold criticisms caused a massive backlash. Eventually, Tolstoy was excommunicated from the Russian Orthodox Church, was condemned by religious authorities, and faced social isolation from many within the upper class. But none of that mattered to him. He had found something deeper than approval, a truth that transcended the expectations of his class, his culture, and even his former beliefs. This new worldview didn't just change the way he lived, it transformed the way he wrote. Tolstoy's literature shifted dramatically. No longer interested in grand narratives of war and aristocracy, he began crafting stories focused on spiritual awakening, moral clarity, and the human search for meaning. One of the most powerful examples of this is his novella The Death of Ivan Ilyich. The story follows a man who, on his deathbed, is forced to confront the fact that he has lived a hollow, superficial life-chasing status and success while ignoring what truly matters. It's a haunting, honest portrayal of the existential crisis that Tolstoy himself had faced. Another key work from this era is Resurrection, where Tolstoy offers a piercing critique of Russian society and the hypocrisy of its institutions. The novel champions compassion, justice, and personal responsibility, echoing Tolstoy's own moral evolution. He didn't stop with fiction. He also began writing philosophical and spiritual essays, passionate texts in which he laid out his beliefs on religion, nonviolence, and ethical living. In works like Confession and The Kingdom of God is Within You, Tolstoy outlined a form of Christianity stripped of tradition and dogma, focused instead on love, humility, and moral courage. He urged people to turn inward, not to priests or institutions for spiritual truth. His message was radical. You don't need a church to live like Christ. You just need love, discipline, and action. This stripped-down practical form of Christianity would go on to influence Mahatma Gandhi, who openly credited Tolstoy with shaping his ideas about peaceful resistance and spiritual leadership. Tolstoy also became a fierce opponent of violence and war. He condemned military force and argued that nonviolence was not only a moral principle, but the only legitimate way to transform society. Naturally, these views made him a target of the Russian government. His writings were censored. He was surveilled by the Tsar's secret police, and yet Tolstoy never backed down. He continued to speak out against corruption, greed, and the systemic oppression of the poor. As he grew older, the conflict between his convictions and his circumstances intensified. His marriage became increasingly strained. His wife Sophia deeply disagreed with his rejection of wealthy, especially given their many children. Their relationship, once passionate, became cold and bitter. Tolstoy felt trapped not just by family, but by society itself. By 1910, at the age of 82, he had reached a breaking point. One night, he made a fateful decision. He left his home in secret with no fixed destination, only a desire to find peace. But his health was fragile. During the journey, he fell seriously ill and was forced to stop at a small rural train station in Estepovo. There, in a modest room, surrounded by only a few close companions, Leo Tolstoy passed away. He died far from the luxury of his youth, but completely at peace with himself. For how this vision influenced his life and writings after Leo Tolstoy's profound discovery about the meaning of life. There was no turning back. The clarity he had found required him to make a radical change not just in theory, but in the very way he lived, thought, loved, and wrote. His new philosophy was not just about personal peace, it was about total transformation, and he was willing to pay the price for it. The first major impact was on his relationship with wealth and aristocracy. For most of his life, Tolstoy had lived like a nobleman. He resided in a large estate, was surrounded by luxury, and enjoyed all the comforts of the upper class. But now he saw these privileges not as blessings, but as obstacles, barriers to a truly meaningful existence. Inspired by the peasants he had once observed and now deeply admired, Tolstoy decided to give up a significant portion of his wealth. He adopted a simple way of life, dressing plainly, working the land with his own hands, and rejecting the elitist comforts that once defined him. To most around him, this move was inexplicably offensive. Friends, relatives, and other nobles struggled to understand why one of Russia's most celebrated writers was turning his back on success, reputation, and the social class he was born into. But for Tolstoy, it was the only way to live in alignment with his beliefs. His transformation extended far beyond lifestyle changes. It also affected his family, especially his marriage to Sophia Tolstoy. Sophia had supported him through much of his career. She had managed his estate, edited his manuscripts, and raised their large family. But she could not accept Tolstoy's newfound desire to abandon their wealth. With multiple children to support and a household to maintain, she viewed his spiritual turn as reckless and irresponsible. This created ongoing tension in their marriage, one that only grew more severe as the years passed. What had once been a loving, passionate relationship became strained, cold, and often painful. Tolstoy's commitment to living by spiritual principles also began to drastically shape his literature. In the past, he had written about high society, war, and romance. But after his spiritual awakening, his focus shifted entirely. His writings became moral, spiritual, and deeply introspective. He began exploring the soul's struggles, what it means to live a truthful life, how to face death, and how to confront the illusions of materialism. One of the most powerful works from this era is The Death of Ivan Ilyich. It tells the story of a man who, on his deathbed, realizes that his entire life has been shallow and meaningless. He had lived for status, comfort, and appearance only to face death with terror and regret. This story mirrored Tolstoy's own experience. Through fiction, he gave voice to the fears and revelations he had once wrestled with in silence. Another major novel from this period is Resurrection, a sharp critique of Russian society, the legal system, and the hypocrisy of the church. It tells the story of a nobleman who seeks redemption after ruining the life of a young peasant woman. The themes are unmistakable: justice, conscience, humility, and transformation. The book was so controversial that it led directly to Tolstoy's excommunication from the Russian Orthodox Church. The institution could not tolerate the fact that one of its most famous sons had become its fiercest critic. But Tolstoy wasn't done. He went beyond novels and began writing spiritual and philosophical essays that further developed his new beliefs. In A Confession, he recounts his personal crisis, his descent into despair, his search for meaning, and the spiritual awakening that saved his life. In The Kingdom of God is Within You, he presents a vision of Christianity that rejects dogma, violence, and political power. He emphasizes the core teachings of Jesus: love, forgiveness, non-resistance to evil, and living by example. He argued that true faith could not be imposed from the outside. It had to arise from inner conviction and be expressed through action. This message caught the attention of a young Indian lawyer and activist, Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi would later say that Tolstoy's writings had a profound influence on his own philosophy of nonviolent resistance. In fact, the two men exchanged letters in the years leading up to Tolstoy's death. Gandhi even named a commune in South Africa, the Tolstoy Farm, in his honor. Tolstoy's rejection of violence didn't stop with religion. He also became one of the most outspoken critics of war and nationalism in Russia. He believed that all forms of violence, whether by the state, military, or individuals, were morally wrong. He called for complete pacifism, arguing that only through peace and love could humanity evolve. Naturally, these views brought him into direct conflict with the Russian government. His books were banned. His letters were intercepted. He was monitored by the Tsar's secret police. But he refused to be silenced. He continued to write, speak, and live in accordance with his convictions, even when it meant social exile. As he aged, the tension between his ideals and his circumstances became unbearable. He felt increasingly trapped by his family, by public attention, and by the very legacy that had once given him pride. His marriage, now deeply fractured, became a daily source of emotional pain. Sophia, still managing the family's finances and struggling with his choices, could no longer reconcile the man she had married with the spiritual reformer he had become. Eventually, Tolstoy reached a breaking point. In October 1910, at the age of 82, he quietly left his home in the middle of the night without fanfare, without explanation, and with no clear destination in mind. All he wanted was peace, but his health was failing. While traveling, he fell gravely ill and was forced to stop at a small railway station in a rural village called Ostapovo. There, in a modest station master's house, lying in a simple bed, surrounded by only a few close companions, Leo Tolstoy died. His final moments were far removed from the wealth, fame, and comfort of his early life. He died humbly, simply, and at peace. It was the symbolic end of a lifelong journey from ego to truth, from privilege to simplicity, from fame to spiritual freedom. Tolstoy's impact didn't end with his death. His ideas continued to spread through his books, his essays, and through the hearts of readers and thinkers across the globe. He'd proven something extraordinary: that it is possible for anyone, no matter how privileged, no matter how lost, to change their life, to ask the hard questions, and to live in alignment with deeper truth. 5. What can we learn from Tolstoy today? Leo Tolstoy's legacy reaches far beyond his literary achievements. His exploration of the meaning of life, the nature of suffering, and the pursuit of happiness remains as relevant today as it was when he first faced his own crisis. In a world where many are still grappling with existential questions about purpose, identity, and value, Tolstoy's journey offers profound lessons. Here are some of the key teachings we can apply to our own lives. 1. External success does not guarantee internal happiness. Tolstoy had everything anyone could desire: fame, wealth, recognition, a family. But despite all of this, he still felt an overwhelming emptiness. This reminds us that material success can bring temporary comfort, but it does not guarantee lasting fulfillment. In fact, the more we chase external validation, whether through money, status, or fame, the more we risk neglecting our internal peace and personal growth.
Ow.
True happiness comes from within, from finding a purpose that transcends external circumstances. 2. Seeking meaning through reason alone can be a dead end. Tolstoy spent years searching for answers through reason science, philosophy, and logic. And yet, while these fields can explain how the world works, they don't answer the essential question of why we exist. Many people today still believe that reason alone can provide the ultimate truth about life. But as Tolstoy realized, purely intellectual exploration often falls short when it comes to answering life's deepest questions. Sometimes the answers we seek are not found through the intellect, but through experience, intuition, and inner wisdom. 3. The meaning of life is not something to be discovered, but something to be lived on. Of the most powerful lessons Tolstoy teaches us is that the meaning of life is not something we find, it's something we create. Instead of waiting for a definitive answer or waiting for life's meaning to magically reveal itself, Tolstoy teaches us to build purpose every day through our choices, actions, and interactions with others. This means that each of us can find meaning in life by choosing to focus on what truly matters: love, kindness, service, and personal growth. 4. Living for others brings true purpose. Tolstoy concluded that living only for oneself leads to emptiness. We are not meant to live for selfish ambition or individual achievement. True purpose comes from dedicating ourselves to the service of others. In a world that often prioritizes individualism, Tolstoy's philosophy reminds us that helping others, whether through acts of kindness, service, or love, can be the most fulfilling pursuit of all. By living for something greater than ourselves, we can find deep satisfaction and meaning. 5. Simplicity is the key to true peace. Of the most profound aspects of Tolstoy's journey was his realization that the relentless pursuit of wealth, status, and material possessions is ultimately an illusion. True peace comes from living simply, free from the constant distractions and pressures of consumerism. In today's society, where materialism often drives much of our behavior, Tolstoy's message is as relevant as ever. True happiness is found not in accumulation, but in the simplicity of life and slowing down, connecting with others, and focusing on what truly matters. 6. Question everything. Tolstoy's journey was built on a single, essential principle: the courage to question everything. He questioned the meaning of life, questioned his own assumptions, and ultimately rejected societal norms that didn't align with his inner truth. Even after becoming one of the greatest writers in history, Tolstoy wasn't afraid to challenge his own beliefs and embrace a completely new way of thinking. This mindset is a powerful reminder to all of us. Don't accept things just because society says so. Don't follow paths simply because others have walked them. Question your assumptions, challenge the status quo, and seek your own truth even if it's a difficult or unpopular one. 7. Put your beliefs into action. For Tolstoy, it wasn't enough to read about the meaning of life or theorize about how to live. The true test of any philosophy or belief system is how it is applied in real life. This is why Tolstoy rejected the passive form of faith promoted by the Orthodox Church. He believed that true Christianity and, by extension, true spiritual living was about action. He put his beliefs into practice. He lived simply, he worked the land, he dedicated himself to helping others, and he actively resisted violence. This teaching is one we can all apply. Don't just talk about your beliefs, live them. Whether you believe in love, kindness, or nonviolence. The true measure of your values is in the way you live them every single day. 8. It's never too late to change, perhaps one of the most inspiring aspects of Tolstoy's journey was the fact that he made such a radical change in his life when he was already an internationally recognized author. At the height of his career, at 50 years old, Tolstoy completely reinvented himself, rejecting his past, his status, and even his family's expectations in order to follow his spiritual calling. He teaches us that it's never too late to change, whether that means changing careers, changing the way we live, or changing our way of thinking. We are not bound by our past decisions. Every day is a new opportunity to evolve and live according to our deepest values. 9. The search for meaning is an ongoing journey. Tolstoy reminds us that the search for the meaning of life is not a one-time event. It is a lifelong journey, one that requires constant questioning, learning, and growth. Tolstoy never stopped evolving. He spent his entire life refining his understanding of love, faith, and meaning. His legacy is proof that the search for truth is not something that ends as a path that unfolds, constantly deepening and expanding over time. We can take comfort in this idea. The journey itself is the point, and it is through the process of seeking that we find deeper purpose and fulfillment. Conclusion: the meaning of life is in our choice. Leo Tolstoy was much more than a brilliant writer. He was a man who had the courage to question everything, to face profound despair, and to search for true meaning beyond the superficiality of society's expectations. His journey shows us that the meaning of life is not found in fame, wealth, or recognition, but in love, compassion, and service to others. There is no single answer to the question of life's meaning. Instead, it is a path of personal discovery, a path that requires us to live authentically, question what we're told, and build purpose through our choices and actions every single day. Tolstoy found his truth by letting go of the ego and living more simply and authentically. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson we can learn from him, that the true purpose of life is not something we find, but something we create through our daily choices. Now, we ask you, how have you been searching for meaning in your life? Tolstoy's legacy teaches us that the meaning of life is in our choices.